I thank him for his reading that for all of us on this important occasion. Mr. President, on another matter, I want to start by welcoming everyone back from the recess. It's good to be back. Time away from Washington is an opportunity to step back and to measure the priorities of party against those of people who sent us here, to make sure that they're properly aligned. As the two parties re-engage this week in a debate about our nation's finances, it's vital that we focus not on mere partisan advantage, but on what's right for the nation. When it comes to the two choices before us of either maintaining an unsustainable status quo on spending or to begin to start cutting spending, the choice could not be more clear. This morning's news brought word that a 47-member panel of some of the nation's top business economists view government overspending as the top threat to our economy. In other words, a majority of those experts think that Washington's inability to live within its means is the single greatest threat to our nation's economic future. This isn't a groundbreaking observation. After all, Americans have been telling lawmakers for more than 2 years that business as usual simply will not cut it anymore. They want us to get our fiscal house in order and to start to create the right conditions for private sector job growth. But today's news is further confirmation of the stakes in the debate over spending, and that Democrats in Congress need to rethink the approach they've taken up to now. The message from the November elections is quite clear. Stop spending money we don't have. Yet Democratic leaders persist in defending budgets that do just that well into the future. Earlier this month, the President unveiled a 10-year budget for the government. At no point in this 10-year projection, would the government spend less than it takes in. It doesn't even try. Just look at the estimates for this year alone. Unless we start to cut this year's projected spending, Washington will spend more than $1.5 trillion more than it takes in. $1.5 trillion more than it takes in this year. About $350 billion more in red ink than we had last year. That's $350 billion more in red ink than we had last year. Think about that. A $350 billion increase in deficit spending over last year. After an election in which the voters unambiguously said they want us to cut spending and stop adding debt. And next year, Democrats in Congress want us to do it again. Once again, they plan to spend more than $1 trillion more than we take in. Same pattern the year after that. They want to spend hundreds of billions of dollars more than we take in. And on and on and on. Now, all of this overspending, of course, just adds to our overall debt. And when you add it all up, the numbers are truly staggering. As a result of Democrat budgets, the federal debt just 5 years from now is expected to exceed $20 trillion. 5 years from now, $20 trillion. Interest payments alone on that debt will exceed $500 billion a year. That's just interest payments on the $20 trillion debt, $500 billion a year. Talk about a disconnect. The American people have spent the last 2 years trying to get their own fiscal houses in order. Millions have lost their jobs. Millions more have lost their homes. Meanwhile, what have the Democrats in Washington been up to? Well, on the day the president was sworn into office, the national debt was $10.6 trillion. In the 25 months since, it's increased by $3.5 trillion. And despite a national uprising over this profligacy and an election that represented a wholesale repudiation of it, here's the president's response. Spend more. He calls it investments. What about Democratic leaders in Congress? Are they reading the writing on the wall? Well, until this past weekend, they insisted they couldn't agree to cut a dime in spending, not a dime. Rather than look for ways that the two parties can work together to rein in spending, They looked for ways to marginalize those who were working hard to come up with ways to do it. They called anybody who wanted to cut a dime in spending an extremist. I'll tell you what's extreme, Mr. President. What's extreme is $20 trillion in debt. That's what's extreme. $500 billion in interest payments a year is extreme. Refusing to agree to even try to live within your means is extreme. Tomorrow, the House will have a vote on a 2-week spending bill. This bill represents an effort to change the culture here in Washington. It says, let's start to change the mentality around here. Let's find $4 billion that all of us can agree to cut it, and continue from that good start. Democratic leaders in Congress resisted even this up until a few days ago. Now they've started to suggest they might be willing to agree to it. This is progress. So this week, Democrats will have an opportunity to show they've gotten the message. They can show they agree the time has come to change the status quo. Less spending, lower debt, reining in the size and scope of government. That's what's needed. That's how we will create the conditions for private sector job growth. Now, Democratic leaders in Congress have tried record spending and deficits. What's it gotten us? More than $3 trillion more in debt and 3 million more jobs lost. $3 trillion in new debt while we lost 3 million jobs. Democrats have an opportunity this week to show they get it. They have an opportunity to show that the status quo on spending and debt is no longer an option, to turn a corner. A lot depends on how they respond to that opportunity. Will they continue to see what they can get away with? Or will they finally concede that the old way of doing business must come to an end? Mr. President, I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.